Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Zach, before we get into our discussion about Krypton Season 1, we have to note the fact that we're recording this on the same day news broke that the upcoming 4th season of the CW Superman and Lois will be its final one. Thoughts?
I thought we knew this already. I thought it was understood that was going to be it. I mean, they didn't say for its 4th and final season when they renewed it with the 10 episodes. But when you cut the cast down to a third and you cut the episodes more or less in half, the writing's on the wall. And I'm disappointed that it's like official, but I'm not surprised.
I had a similar reaction as you. And more than anything, I'm just glad that everyone, the people making the show and the fans watching the show, can all go into it knowing that it's the final season. Because, look, the risk, the fear with any of these shows is that it'll end on a cliffhanger. Now, I do still stand by my position that if season 3 had been the final one, that Rocky 3-esque finish would have worked. But yeah. I'm glad we actually get a proper farewell. And yes, in an ideal world, it'd be great if the show ran for 10 seasons like our favorite Smallville. But it's just that's not the reality that we're in these days.
No, I was talking to some friends in a chat after that news broke, and they were like, where would you rank Superman and Lois in the Superman TV shows? And I was like, it's hard to say, because even though it's going to be 4 seasons, it's like 50 episodes, which I know sounds like a lot, 50 episodes, right? A lot of shows would love to have 50 episodes. Krypton would love to have 50 episodes. We'll get into that. But I mean, Smallville 218, Lois and Clark, I think was like in the high 80s. The Superboy show, over 100 episodes. I think the George Reeves show had 100 episodes.
Just over, yeah.
So, and I know those are half hour, but still, those are episodes. So to have something be 50 episodes, and then it's not over yet. So how does season 4 go? So it's hard to say, but it's definitely been one of my favorite pieces of Superman media, and I've really, really enjoyed it. So I'm going to miss it when it's gone.
Same. And look, you'll continue covering each episode on Always Hold On to Superman and Lois. And here on Digging for Kryptonite, we'll do what we've been doing. We'll do an episode on the entire season when it's done. I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you in our little cold open here before we get into Krypton, we are here talking about Krypton, another recent Superman show that ended prematurely. This one only ran 2 seasons. Superman and Lois now just got 4. And we're seeing, just with television shows generally, seasons are shorter and series do not run nearly as long as they used to for a variety of factors. But I guess my question is, the audience knows, like, Smallville was so formative for both of us. And I think we recognize part of the reason why that was that we lived with it and in that world for so long. So I don't know, do you think in this current television landscape, there's the possibility of a show having even close to the same kind of impact on you, given that it's almost certainly not going to have that kind of tenure?
No, I don't think there is. Like, I just think it's, like you said, like we've said too, when you with something in and out, for 10 years, and also the reliability of when it comes out. A whole thing with Superman and Lois is like, when is the show coming out? When is it on breaks? Why does it take 6 months to show 15 episodes? That was the whole thing. And just Smallville, you knew every fall, right? The show was going to start, and you knew every May you're going to have a big season finale. And then you know that there's going to be a summer break for 3 months, and you're going to come back. And that consistency is key. And I know we're older now and we're not the teenagers we were when the show came out. We have real life responsibilities. So nothing is going to like imprint itself on us in such a strong way. But even you look at all the big shows, like the Game of Thrones or the Breaking Bads or whatever. And even them, they have their prequel spinoffs. Both of those particular shows did. And that keeps them relevant. But when those are over, I mean, it's going to be, there'll be important footnotes, right? And like, oh yeah, or Mad Men or whatever, right? But to have that just baked into your everyday life fandom, it's just not the same. It's just not the same.
No, I agree. I feel the same. And again, it's a little bittersweet, right? The fact that we likely won't have that kind of television viewing experience, but I'm so glad that we had it at the time. And it clearly still means a lot to us.
Made us the people we are today.
Very true. All right. Hey, I'm proud of us. I said off mic, I was like, this little cold open could turn into a half-hour segment of the show. We did great. All right. On that note, let's get into our episode. Before the rocket carrying Krypton's last hope, before the kindly couple, before the great metropolitan newspaper, there was the world that gave birth to the universe's greatest hero. Now, in Doomed Planet, we consider Krypton's history, legacy, and destruction, and the part of it that survived. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Syfy's Krypton Season 1 is the host of Always Hold On to Smallville, returning guest, Zach Moore. Welcome back.
Anthony, I am tired of these Superman prequel shows. Can we just...
This is why you were the perfect person to have. But listen, I got to say, there's so much to unpack. But I was curious. I did a little digging on social media because I was wondering what were people saying about this, not even when it aired, but when it was first announced. And I came across this one social media post that reads, well, now this just seems unnecessary. And that's coming from someone who watched and loved 10 seasons of Smallville. And the young whippersnapper who wrote that, me. That was my initial reaction to this. So we'll break it all down. We'll set up the show. We'll go through all of that. But on this note of prequels and the announcement of the show, which was in 2014, crazy enough, and the show didn't air until 2018. But when this was announced, just a few years after Smallville ended, what was your reaction?
It was like a parody of itself. I think I'd even seen a funny video on the internet somewhere that like, oh, coming soon, Krypton, before it blew up, right? Making fun of the Gotham and Smallville and all these prequel shows. And I was right there with him. I was like, what? This is unnecessary. I mean, can we stop having TV shows about the superheroes that aren't about the superheroes? And maybe counterintuitive. I do not classify Smallville as one of those because Clark Kent was the main character. It's a little different than a Birds of Prey or a Batwoman or a Gotham or however you want to cut it with all these Batman shows where there's no Batman. But then this is all we knew, as far as I knew, like it was a prequel show set on Krypton. We didn't know the plot. We didn't know. I mean, over time, things that came out about it and turned into very much beyond that. And even now, I think had it just been that, I might not have liked it as much. But as it turned out, it was much more than that. Which is great. Now I know there's a lot of comic book mythology about Krypton and whatnot. So there's a lot of there's some precedent for something like this. But in 2014, as you said, Man of Steel had just came out and Smallville ended a couple years before, and we didn't know when we were getting a Superman sequel, and there was no Superman animated series going on. And I was like, can we get some? I was craving for that consistent Superman content that's been in my life for 10 years, right? I didn't know if this was going to scratch that itch, but boy, was I wrong.
Yes. And did you end up watching it as it originally aired?
I watched it and I was immediately won over by it. I was like, this is fantastic. This is what you do if you're going to do a show like this. And I was very glad that I gave it a chance and watched both seasons and wish there were more. That's where I am.
Well, I'm glad you at least gave it a chance. I stupidly did not. And so for the past few years, this has been one of those gaps in my Superman fandom, and kind of an odd one because it is so recent. And even though, look, I've had ebbs and flows in terms of my comic book consumption, and especially during the New 52, I really sat that out and then I had to get caught up and all of that stuff. But when it comes to the Superman shows and movies, the idea that I would skip one, it was kind of crazy to me. But I think I don't know, just where I was at that point in my life, in my fandom, that initial gut reaction of just like, man, this feels so unnecessary. But again, I really regret that, and I'm so glad, and I'm really happy to report, and I don't want to bury the lead. I loved the first season of Krypton. I watched it over the past few days. It's been a very busy time at work. It was hard to kind of fit all of this in, so much so I watched the last 2 episodes this morning. Like I was trying to finish it last night after I had done a recording for another episode, and I was like falling asleep, and I was like, I got to save it for the morning. So, But all that being said, my interest and my enthusiasm for it sustained me through this busy time and trying to fit it in. And I have not yet watched season 2. I'll be watching that over the next few days, and that'll be that will be the discussion for next week's episode. But man, I wish I had gotten to it sooner. And I'll just say this, I don't want to oversell it to the audience. I don't want to build this up too much. But for anyone who's listening to this who hasn't watched Krypton, please give it a shot. It is a worthy entry in the Superman canon.
I would compare it, to use a more current analogy, I would call it the Andor of the Superman shows. It's sophisticated. It has things to say. It looks fantastic. It's high budget. The acting and the writing is so good, and it just really elevates something that you either had no expectation or low expectation going into. And I feel like, and when talk about all these Star Wars shows that come out, and I'm like, Andor, why is that a thing? And I think that's the best thing that the Disney has put out with the Star Wars name on it. I just think it's a fantastic show, and it just shows that there's these little corners and pockets of these universes that when the acting and writing and presentation is so high quality, and I can tell the people who made this show really took the material seriously. Like it makes a big difference. You can win over skeptics. Fans were a skeptical lot, right? I was right there with you when I heard about this, and I was immediately won over. And I wish there were more seasons, but I'm glad we got the 2 we did. I'm looking forward to breaking it down with you here.
No, absolutely. So Krypton aired on Syfy and premiered in March 2018, ultimately ran for 2 seasons of 10 episodes apiece. And it follows Seg-El, grandfather of Kal-El, and it's set 200 years before the destruction of Krypton. And this is a Krypton sharply divided along class lines. So you have the upper class, the gilded members of society who live in the towers above Kandor City, and then the lower class, the rankless, who are not named and don't have their own houses, so to speak, in the city below. So that's our initial setup. It's a Krypton that has become a theocracy ruled by the voice of Rao. And we have a pair of time travelers. We have Adam Strange and then later General Zod. I know I'm jumping ahead a bit. And this is all against the backdrop of the approaching Brainiac ship, the threat of Brainiac. And not just any Brainiac. Hands down, the best live-action Brainiac we have seen ever.
Well, it's not like we have a lot to choose from. But there's no question. There's no contest. It's fantastic. You have the skull ship. You have the green skin. You have the robotic. It's amazing. And that they accomplish this on television. And this is why people we're still upset that we haven't gotten Brainiac in a movie. Like you're telling me the Sci-Fi Channel original series gave us an on-point, fantastic interpretation of this character, and we're still waiting for it on the big screen. And this version could stand up to anything you'd see on the big screen. It's so well done, I think.
They have set the bar very high. I hope it's only a matter of time before we see Brainiac on the big screen. We've had multiple iterations of Superman on the big screen, and we continue to get Luthor, then Zod, Luthor, Zod, then Luthor. But eventually I think we'll get Brainiac. But this show, this little 2-season sci-fi show set the bar so high that I hope whenever we do get Brainiac on the big screen, they take some cues from what they did on this show. And again, not just the best Brainiac, but truly a top tier Zod. I know for you, maybe even number 1.
It's very possible. Like, I watched it back in the day, and then I rewatched it for this, and I was like, "Is this going to hold up?" I'm like, "Yes, it hold up." And Colin Selman is so good. Walter Steele, for your Arrow fans out there, Oliver Queen's father-in-law. He's a very accomplished actor. He's in a lot of stuff, but as far as like mainstream genre me over here, like that's what I know him from. Also, he's in the Pierce Brosnan James Bond films in a supporting role, so look for him in those movies. But he's just so good. And actually, I made a tweet about this, and I was like, after careful consideration, I think Colin Selman might be the best Zod. I didn't tag him or anything. I just put it out there with a gif of him saying kneel before Zod. And I guess he saw it and retweeted. He was like, high praise. Thank you. And I'm like, all right. Like the actor, he knows that I love this performance so much. So that kind of, that obviously that always puts a smile on your face when that gets recognized. And I wasn't even fishing for that. It just kind of came out of nowhere. And the only thing that would hold him back from being my favorite Zod is he doesn't face Superman. Like that's a kind of a key component, you know? And I say this all the time on Always On to Smallville, my show, because there are a lot of Zods floating around on that show. We've never got a bad Zod. Every Zod is fantastic. Terrence Stamp is fantastic. Michael Shannon is fantastic. Callum Blue is fantastic. Colin Salmon is fantastic. So we're very fortunate with our Zod actors, and they're all very different, and I think that's a good thing.
No, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, yeah, he's up there for me, but they all are. I mean, I think it's tough. You know, my heart is always with Smallville, and I was very pleasantly surprised with Callum Blue when he entered the scene, and season 9, and it was a favorite for both of us. So there's a special place for him. I think for me, Michael Shannon is still number 1, because that was the first time where I really felt like I got the character in a way that I really hadn't before, right? This whole idea that his sole reason for being is the preservation of Krypton and the Kryptonian race, and Superman's actions in that film in particular essentially undermine his entire reason for being. And the fact that that's the reason for that hatred, it really kind of clicked in a way that hadn't necessarily before. So he's probably my number 1, but yeah, there's not a bad one in the bunch. And look, even on the note of Brainiac, look, I love James Marsters on Smallville and everything, but yeah, just as far as comics accurate Brainiac, and just, I mean, the visuals, and you said this before, I agree. I mean, the show is just gorgeous. And I was watching because I bought the Blu-ray of the complete series, and I watched some of the special features where they, take you behind the scenes and they show you the sets. And I think what was cool about it was that so much of it was practical. Like most of the sets where they spent so much of their time, the streets of Kandor City where the Rankless are, and then the various chambers up above, most of that was practical, but then they would build out the rest of it with CGI, and certainly all of the exteriors and all the aerial shots and everything. But they had I guess they had the budget and the artistry to really, really bring it to life, and it was a great blend.
Mm-hmm. No, that's part of it. Like very Coruscant-esque from the Star Wars prequels, and then obviously. So I don't know if you want to get into this now, but there's a lot of Man of Steel influence on this show. Should we talk about this now, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about it. So, like we said, this was first announced in 2014, so just a year after Man of Steel. And David Goyer, who had written Man of Steel, was one of the executive producers on Krypton. And from the outset, and you might know this better than me, I don't know if this was more speculation or officially confirmed, but the idea was that this was a prequel to Man of Steel at the inception point.
That was my understanding. Like, I don't recall exactly all the all the articles and stuff I was reading back then, but it was my understanding that, they were building out this new DCEU, and this is another branch of that, much like you're going to get the Penguin show spinning out of the Batman in modern times. You were going to get this Krypton show spinning out of Man of Steel. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. We're building out this interconnected universe. Everybody was always talking about it, and this is it. And obviously, David S. Goyer was writer on Man of Steel, and he had been with Chris Nolan on the Dark Knight trilogy, so he had that DC, legitimacy on his resume, and clearly, like, it's very influenced by Man of Steel. Just even like the class system kind of thing, the Genesis chamber, codex, like even way past the pilot, which we can talk about a little bit more in detail, but like the pilot was shot and then kind of reshot and reconfigured, and this show was rethought after the pilot and became something it wasn't originally going to be. And then obviously it's not connected to Man of Steel because you have things like Colin Salmon. It's not Michael Shannon as General Zod. That would have happened, right? But there was a couple of early trailers that showed some very different, very clearly Man of Steel-esque like technology and whatnot, which changed a little bit, and it became this merging of, as everything always is, the crystals of the Donnerverse, and I don't even know how to describe the technology of the Man of Steel universe, but I like that quite a bit, and it became this merging of things, and then it just became its own thing, and honestly, like I guess I'm glad it's its own thing, because obviously they couldn't do what they did. There's no way to compare it. because obviously the General Zod thing completely throws out it being a true prequel. So I can't sit here and say like it's better or worse, but I'm so happy with what we got. I guess I'm glad that all turned out like it did.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, in a world where the DCEU had continued as originally intended, and this could have actually been folded in to that in a meaningful way. I mean, maybe that could have worked, but that clearly went off in its own direction. So even if they had attempted to make this fit in with that, I don't know what would have become of that. And I feel like either way, it probably would have ended up being stifling more than anything else. Like, I don't know that the benefits would have outweighed, whatever, kind of trade-offs they'd have to make in order to fit in with that. So, I mean, I think ultimately the fact that it's its own thing is a positive.
Yeah. And my suspicion is it would have truly been just a straight up prequel. No time travel, none of this stuff. And they included that to kind of made it not a prequel. And that was part of the, I mean, this is all conjecture, but I can only imagine if it was truly a Man of Steel prequel, it just would have been, this is the story of what happened on Krypton before it blew up. And that's it. There's no time travel. There's no, Phantom Zone, alternate universe things, whatever they were talking about there. And this is what we got. And it's interesting that, you see these first couple of trailers, but then even watching the episodes themselves, like, Snyder cut, right? You got an eye for this sort of thing, right? When things change, I'm like, man, I don't know. Seg-El looks maybe a couple years younger in some of these scenes, right? Was it just me, or I see you nodding along? So
no, I'm with you. And the hair too. I mean, there were a few things where I'm like, so our mutual friend Tyler Patrick from Krypton Report, and he'll be joining me next week to talk about Krypton season 2. Archivist extraordinaire. He had the foresight to download and hang on to those first trailers that were released, and he shared them with us. And there's a 20-second teaser and then a longer, like 90-second trailer. And the trailer in particular, again, you see that's from the original pilot, and you see a number of differences. Lyta Zod, for example, her look is a bit different in that. I mean, that's more superficial, but you definitely see more of the visual style of Man of Steel. The key, right? The Kryptonian key.
The key is not the stone, the crystal that it turns out being in the show. It's legit the necklace that Clark has. That opens up everything in Man of Steel, and some other older guy gives it to him.
Yeah, it's not the young Adam Strange who we meet in the actual show. No. I don't know if this was meant to be an older Adam Strange or just a different character entirely. Right? Yeah. So that's a key piece of this. And I mentioned this at the top, the time travel.
# release the Krypton cut.
Oh, God. We can't go through this again. But although, I don't know, I don't know if there's enough support for a true movement, but it would be cool to see what the original version of that looked like. But yeah, sort of the jumping off point for this series is that a time traveling Adam Strange approaches Seg-El and reveals that one of Superman's enemies, we all understand to be Brainiac at this point in the show, has traveled back in time to destroy Krypton at an earlier point, thus preventing the birth of Kal-El and the ultimate his arrival on Earth and becoming Superman. And again, spoiler alert, folks, but the show's been out for a few years, right? Down the line in the season, we find out it's actually Brainiac is arriving on schedule to bottle the city of Kandor, as we all know that to be part of Krypton's history. And it's General Zod who has traveled back in time to try to stop this. So we have this whole time travel component, but that does add a really interesting dimension to all of this, because it gives it this urgency and this connection point and relevance to the current day DC universe. So I thought that was a clever take on it.
I think everything they did with this was very clever and add a lot of intrigue, because like I said, if they just, here's the story of Krypton before it blew up, like it would just be so by the numbers, and you'd be like, oh, here they're gonna, it adds so much intrigue, because you're not even thinking it, like things you think are plot holes become plot twists, because you're like, wait a minute, Adam Strange, like, dude, like Krypton's gonna blow up, so what is your purpose here? Oh, hey, it turns out he knows that. He doesn't tell Seg-El, because of course you wouldn't. And then he's like, yeah. And then Seg-El's like, yeah, why would I help you let my planet blow up when General Zod over here wants to help me save the planet? And they're like, oh no, it's going to mess up the timeline. Like, there's so much character intrigue here, which I think in lesser hands, like it just would have been a by the numbers, all the character motivation. It makes everything so much more interesting. All these reveals over the course of the season, right?
it is very interesting, and I think the character motivations and dynamics, it is all very intriguing, and alliances shift and motivations shift, and there are moments of true conflict that really do resonate. I mean, Seg in particular, like this is quite a dilemma to be put in, right? It's like if you stop Brainiac, the idea is Brainiac takes Kandor and that destabilizes the planet's core, and that ultimately leads to its destruction. But without that, we don't have Superman, we don't have Kal-El arrive on Earth and become the greatest hero the universe has ever known. So it puts Seg and all of the characters in a very difficult position to make kind of an unfathomable sacrifice for an idea, right? For just this notion that my descendant becomes this greatest hero. There's such a removal there that it's you get where the characters are struggling with this.
Yeah, it's some, like, I don't know, high concept stuff, because they even talk about, they try to suss it out themselves. They're like, hey, like, that's great where you're from. My theoretical grandson is like an awesome superhero, but like right now we got billions of people right here I need to save, and I'm going to worry about that. And like, you really can't. It's hard to like pick a side. Like, obviously, like, you want like, oh no, we got to save Superman, but then you totally see their point of view, and like, and that's what good shows do. These characters they all come into conflict because they make organic decisions. You know, that you disagree with some of them, but you understand, like, all the stuff the Zods do. Like, I get it.
Yeah. I have to say, when they first announced this, again, like I've talked about, I was skeptical from the jump. And I remember not really being sold on the idea of focusing on Superman's grandfather 200 years before.
Okay.
And I
have
remember
thoughts on this. Yes.
And I remember saying, well, it should be about Jor-El and Zod and the doomed friendship. Because of course, what do I have in my head? I have 10 years of Smallville. So like, that's but I don't think that would have served this well. I think this was the right way to go.
No, that's exactly what I want to bring up. Like, I think it's so clever that it's about the grandfather. Because if they do this with Jor-El, I'm like, guys, like it's universe shrinking. It's kind of redundant. It's like, way too like, oh, his dad went through all this, and then, you know, it's like, no, but your grandfather, you kind of remove it a generation, it kind of opens up a lot of story possibilities for you that don't, like, none of this is, because they removed it from Man of Steel, none of this in canon with anything else, but we all kind of know the Superman story, and if Jor-El would do certain things, I don't like, if he went to Earth, like, that's a stupid idea. So if you start doing things like that, you're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't fit the myth. But now it opens up the universe for way more story possibilities. And so 200, I want to bring this up. Let's get into this now. The timeline, 200 years. Do Kryptonians live to like 100 years or something? Because Jor-El, presumably is the one in the Genesis chamber that whatever. Right. So what is he? He's 200 years old when Krypton goes. Zod, like, he's conceived now, so he's like, what are your thoughts on that?
I know. I didn't dwell on that, but the thought crossed my mind. I was like, wait a minute. I guess their life cycles are different. I don't know. Unless, and I haven't seen season 2 yet, but I'm assuming this is not accounted for there. I mean, unless there was some plan to account, maybe their planet's in stasis at a certain point. I don't know.
That's maybe so. The cycles are different. Maybe years are different. Kryptonian years. I mean, it's just strange that they keep hammering that exact year, you know, again and again and again. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, that means Jor-El and Zod are 200 years old when Krypton blows up, which I know some Jor-El's a little older looking, but they're not that old. But anyway, that's something that I don't think they ever really account for, but you can just say, like, it's alien stuff. Don't worry about it.
Look, as far as how Kryptonians age, you know better than anybody on Smallville. Look at the transformation that Jor-El underwent from his walkabout on Earth to Krypton's destruction a few years later.
6 years later, 20 years before. It's, oh my goodness.
He went from Tom Welling to Julian Sands, rest in peace, in a very short amount of time. So who's to say, really? But no, I think the 200 years bit, aging questions aside, I think, yeah, that gives them some room, right? Because that's far enough removed where, you know, it's a period of history we're not as familiar with, and they can take some liberties, and it's not, it doesn't have to line up so neatly. The other thing too is, and we hit on this, right? But we've seen a lot with Jor-El right? Even in Man of Steel, that opening sequence there, and it's great. It was one of the first times I really connected with the Krypton piece of the origin story, right? Even going back to the Donner movie, I mean, it's iconic. I enjoy that piece of it, but it's always like, I want to get to Smallville. That's when the story, like, I get more invested in it. But watching Man of Steel, that was one of the first times where I felt, okay, I'm really kind of on board with this part of the story. So I think that primed me a little bit, for this, even though, again, I didn't watch it at the time. But so again, I think the 200 years, it gives you more room, and it opens up the whole idea of the House of El, right? And over the years on the show, we've talked about various Elseworlds stories, things like Red Sun and take your pick. And I think one of the things that I've been kind of sorting out as we've been going through those stories, like what is appealing about the Elseworld stories, other than just you get to see the character in an unfamiliar situation. And what I've come to is that if you take away the upbringing with the Kents, right? It's like, well, what's left? And I think that's why I kind of always hit a little bit of a wall with the Elseworld stories, because it's like, well, of course, if he's not raised by the Kents, he's going to be different if he lands in Soviet Russia, right? But what I came to is like, well, if you take that away, then it's like, well, who is he at his core, right? And so I think the idea of just kind of tracing back that lineage and getting more of a sense of his ancestors, the people who came before, what they were like, what they were about. I mean, Val-El, Seg's grandfather, right, gives him this whole speech towards the end of the season about how the House of El, they weren't given that sigil, which means hope. They chose it, right? And they instill hope, not through their words, but through action, right? And so just kind of this idea that like the family was about something, and to whatever extent that's ingrained at a cellular level into Kal-El, I like that. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more.
I did like the On My World Means Hope has become kind of a meme in recent years. I mean, different versions of Superman State, Supergirls, they all have their own versions. And I feel like maybe this is my favorite explanation. You sit down and talk about it because it has some substance to it, and that kind of ties. That's one thing you can still see left over from being connected to Man of Steel is all the houses have the same shape with a different symbol in it. All the other versions of Superman, like Superman the movie, it's all a bunch of weird shapes, and Superman just happened to be an S. This is like, okay, we have that Pentagon, and then you get the S and you get this weird symbol and stuff, and the Zod symbol, as we see later on. I guess they just decided, well, we shot enough stuff. We can, we can't reshoot every scene and every costume. We'll leave it be. But no, I really did like that explanation. I really connected to his connection to the grandfather, right? Because a lot about fathers and sons, and Smallville, of course, and whatnot. But even here, and not that he was so close to his parents. And I forgot. I'm like, what happened to his parents anyway? And then after I watched the first episode, I'm like, oh, that's what happened to his parents. And that's your classic, hero's journey, parents die thing. But he was super close to his grandfather. They established that when he's a little kid, and they're so emotional. They have this connection, and then you have the hologram, and you're like, oh, because Val-El, Seg-El's grandfather, so Superman's great-great-grandfather, is kind of the Jor-El of the story, if you want to transpose that. And he gets, we think he gets executed in the first scene of the show. And then we find out that he had this Fortress of Solitude, and Seg-El finds it, and there's this hologram. You're like, oh, That's how they're going to keep him in the show. That's okay. That's cool. Yeah. And then in the season finale, we find out that no, Zod met him in the Phantom Zone and gets him back out. I'm like, oh my God, like he's back and now he's a real character. And that's so cool. Like, to me, I don't know, it didn't feel cheap to me. I felt very clever. And I like what a prominent role he played in the show, and the relationship between him and Seg-El was really an anchor point for the whole thing for me.
It was. No, for me as well. I think like you said, we see a lot of the father-son dynamic. And I'm always there for that. But the grandfather-grandson angle is a new little pocket to explore. And again, to have the parallel where we have Kal-El's grandfather tasked with saving him, right? And then his relationship with his own grandfather, it worked great. And again, the parallels abound. Like you said, we open with the execution of Val-El because he is trying to spread the word that they're not alone in the universe and that there's a threat out there. To the
Council of Krypton, who doesn't trust it or doesn't like what he has to say. Yeah.
Yep. So that old story. And yeah, he's seemingly executed. And then later, like you said, in the finale, we find out he was able to escape to the Phantom Zone, and then Zod is able to retrieve him and all of that. But but then to have Seg discover the fortress and then receive the guidance of Val-El via hologram, just as Clark later will with Jor-El. It was a nice touch. It's funny because, how do I put this? Like with Smallville, there were a lot of nods to the future, right? And what was going to come. And look, some of them were kind of cool and we're like, oh, that was neat. And then there were other times where we would roll our eyes a little bit, right?
Very much so.
But I feel like here and maybe it was because it was 200 years removed. I don't know. Or they were just able to strike a more delicate balance where I didn't feel they were so like cutesy or precious with any of these nods. Like anytime there was a reference to something or a character, whatever it was, it felt organic to this story. It didn't feel like, oh, they just threw that in there because they know Superman fans will be happy to hear it or see it.
No, I felt the same way. And we both love Smallville, right? But they went to that well far too many times. And I got to remind myself, look, when they started, they didn't know they were going to be 10 years. They thought they might just be 1 year. So like, we better get this stuff in now, right? Every last I see you in a uniform flying, Clark Kent, mild mannered reporter, blah, 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 blah. And I'd say, honestly, like, I think 30% of those are great, but 70% of them just they make me roll my eyes. And none of that is here. And I think they treat that very delicately. And even when you get to hear Zod's insight about, we'll talk about the Zod more later, but like his insight into his relationship with Jor-El and Superman, I was like, this is fantastic. He's like, I take no pleasure in being his enemy. And I'm like, yeah, no, I believe that. Like, that's exactly what he thinks. And so speaking of Superman, a couple things. I had forgotten they used the John Williams theme in this. I was like added to the list of let's unpack this for a second. Because I know I've heard you had this conversation like and before in other podcasts. Is the John Williams music the Christopher Reeve Superman theme, or is it the Superman theme? And shows like this and Black Adam, for example, like it kind of says, no, this is the Superman theme. But I mean, where are you on that now? Hearing that again here, has that helped move the needle for you?
I think it has. Because yes, we have talked about this, and especially when Henry Cavill made that ill-fated Black Adam cameo. I'm back, guys. I'm back. But no, yeah, we had that exact discussion. My position has always been, it is one of the most iconic pieces of music. It's gorgeous, but it's the Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner theme. And at the same time, though, now seeing it pop up or hearing it pop up in these other instances, and here in particular, because now the Black Adam thing was one piece, but then to kind of have it here, I'm like, yeah, maybe. And it's not like it's in full force, right? It's just a few notes of it in a couple of places where you get the.
It's a fanfare.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe I think it has moved the needle. I think that's a good way of putting it. I think now I do look at it more as like it's the Superman theme, even if it's just a little piece of it.
And everything to do with Brendan Routh gets away with it because he is sort of Christopher Reeve Superman. So I think that's its own conversation. Like, well, it's in Superman Returns. So of course it is, because that's a sequel to those.
Smallville too.
Smallville too. But Smallville, like, that's kind of its own thing, right?
Well, yeah.
So the way it was used here was very much similar to season 2 of Smallville. Like that's what I like, the reorchestrations of it, and you hear it at very key. Like I think it's like 2 or 3 times in the pilot, where when you see the fortress, you see the S, you see the cape, that sort of thing. And then you don't hear it anymore. And I thought to myself, oh, was this just like a pilot thing? Like, did they like, because Smallville used it and like, oh, we can't use it anymore. Somebody called from upstairs, so it's going to cost you. You're going to keep using that. But then in the season finale, when Val-El gets out of the fortress, you hear that dun dun dun, dun. I was like, yeah, because he's in the cape and he's got the S. Like, I don't know, like to me, I do love the Man of Steel theme and you know, the Superman the Animated Series and the Lois and Clark theme. They all have their role. But I think, you know, theatrically, cinematically moving forward, like, include at least the fanfare and mix it in. Like the way that Michael Giacchino does the Star Trek movies, where he keeps kind of the old theme in there and does some new stuff. I think that's the mix. That's the best way to do it. Because then you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. You know, you can have new stuff, because I love the Danny Elfman Batman theme. We all grew up with it, right? It's the theme for Batman the Animated Series. Talk about muddying the waters there. But I don't know, man. Like the again, Michael Giacchino, the Batman score, that might be my favorite Batman theme now. I don't know. So I wouldn't want to deprive us of getting more versions. It's just tough. Like, and you know why they go back to it, because it's like, you know, I thought about that because you mentioning, oh, they put this in here for that or this or that. And I'm like, yeah, they probably did that because people would gravitate towards that. But I don't know, man, it puts a smile on my face every time I hear it. So I wouldn't want to not hear it anymore. So I'm glad it has evolved past just being in a movie franchise from the 70s and 80s.
Perfectly said. No, I echo that. I think as long as it's not relied on too much, because like you said, I mean, all these other, like, again, the Lois and Clark, all the ones that you mentioned, it's like, yeah, I would hate to think of those projects without that. So as long as whatever new project we're talking about gets its own musical identity, but there can be a few notes of it here and there, I'm cool with that. I think that's fair. And I think it's where we've landed. I mean, it keeps, it's undeniable. Like it keeps popping up.
Do you think they're going to use it in Superman Legacy?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That might win me over on that movie. Well,
that's a separate discussion, but I feel like, and I don't say this in an arrogant way, but I feel like I know exactly what that movie is going to be. And I maybe I'm going to be wrong. I don't know. But my prediction is we're going to hear at least something from it. If not,
I would think so too. Yeah. I follow you. I know where you're going with that, but I thought, I thought they might just use in the pilot, and I don't remember if it's in season 2 at all. Maybe they drop it, but they kind of wrap that around like this the cape. You know, like I don't know where you want to go with this next, but like you want to talk about the cape as the Back to the Future photo.
Yeah. So we get this time traveling Adam Strange. Are you an Adam Strange fan to any degree?
No, not at all. I don't care about him whatsoever. So he didn't move the needle for me at all. Like when he showed up, I'm like, oh, okay. I think I saw, is he in the DCAU? I think he is. Is he? Is he like in an episode of something?
You know, he might be in the background. I can't remember him ever having a role.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think, like, I was like, oh no, wait, that's Orion. Like I was going through my head of like, who are these humans, people that are floating around in space? I knew who he was just through osmosis of being a DC comic fan, but I have no opinion about him whatsoever. And I thought he was a very weird choice to wedge into the show, but I did end up liking him. Like all the things that I could identify, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to like this. I ended up liking it. And that's the sign of a good show right there.
Yeah, I think he worked here. I know, again, reading comments and IMDb reviews as I was making my way through, people cited the fact that the Zeta beams, right, are only meant to carry him through space, not time travel. But it's, again, I think that's we can kind of go along with that. No, I think it works. He is a lesser known figure in the DC universe. So again, I think that gives a little more flexibility. I mean, this whole idea that he's kind of a loser at this point in time, right? And he's trying to, it's very little Legends of Tomorrow-esque. Got a little bit of those. Making a name for himself. Making a name for himself. That's fine. I mean, I don't know. I've not read a ton of Adam Strange. There's a really great miniseries called Planet Heist that was early 2000s. That was really good when I read that. But I mean, I'd be hard pressed to tell you, oh, these are his defining characteristics. So I think he worked. I think he worked just fine here. But yeah, he shows up right with this warning.
I got to stop you, Anthony, though. Yeah. Did you recognize the actor?
Oh, I did look him up, but no.
What if I told you he was in an episode of Smallville?
Oh, who was he?
I had to look it up too. Like, I don't know. I didn't just instantly recognize it. He is in Rush when Chloe is making out with that guy in the torch and Clark walks in. That's him.
That's him.
That's one scene making out with Allison Mack there. And then he goes about his way. But
I did see he was all connected. I did see he was Canadian, so that makes sense.
That was it. Anyway,
that makes sense.
The Smallville legacy lives on in Krypton.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So yeah, he shows up again with this warning that Brainiac has gone back in time, right? And yeah, he has Superman's cape, and it's disintegrating, right?
Yeah, it's the picture from Back to the Future, right? It's like, if time continues on its current course, like you're going to disappear, right? Jim Nielsen, Marty McFly's brother, Mark McClure. So it is hashtag it's all connected again. I feel like, I don't know, like when I was thinking about the show, it was interesting rewatching it. Like I felt like there was more of this whole like him and his bartender friend and Adam Strange running around trying to fix things, and you see the cape disintegrating. The cape really doesn't, it's there, but it really is not the focus of a lot of things up until like the first couple episodes and then the end. But outside of that, it's just kind of there, which I guess is good. Like I didn't find myself like, I need an update on Superman's cape, but I thought it was odd that he had his cape, and I don't think they ever really explained how he got a hold of that, but sure.
Yeah, that is actually, I know. That's because it's like, did Superman give it to him? Did he take it? How did he come to get this?
Well, the only reason this works is like he is kind of a screw up, trying to scramble and make a name for himself, and like leap before you look kind of guy. So that's why he goes in there with false information, or like what he thinks is like Brainiac. He's like, oh yeah, well, I guess it must have been Zod. I don't know. And that's what makes it so good when like all this truth is revealed, and Seg-El's like, well, you thought it was this and now it's that. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? And you're like, yeah, how was he supposed to believe anything you say, Adam Strange? I think, and we've been talking about how fantastic the show is and how it looks and all that. I think the one area where they kind of cheaped out is I'd always remembered it as like the quote unquote Adam Strange episode where you get just like 2 or 3 flashbacks of where he came from. And instead of having him talk to, I don't know, other actors in alien makeup, because Rand Thanagar War, he's talking to people from Rand. Like that's some deep comic knowledge that I picked up along the way somewhere. He's in a hallway talking to some voices. I was like, okay, you guys obviously ran out of budget. So to me, that was the only thing that stuck out of like, you guys ran out of budget, is that those scenes of him talking to the people from Rand, I guess.
But well, and it's even more egregious because those are his people. It's Sardath and Alana, his wife and father-in-law. and they're humanoid. So it's like, you would have just needed a little costume and makeup. Like it wouldn't have been anything along the lines of what they had to do for Brainiac. I agree. That was a little awkward.
Because I was like, why is he in a hall? What? I don't understand. Like it was just, to me, it was even more confusing because I'm like, why is he here? Why aren't they seeing him face to face? And I was like, okay, all right, I'll give you this. Everything else is so great. I'm going to give you this one thing show. I liked him with the Detroit hat,
Planet Detroit.
Planet Detroit, and then Planet Houston. Like I love that. That's a great reference. It's a reference without being a reference, right?
Do you want to know something? That wasn't even what I was thinking. It was just a funny line to me. And it's like, now, of course, as you say it, of course, it's like obvious, but they worked. Like that's the thing. Even without me making that connection in my head, like, I was just there for it.
When Rom, Una's mom, gets assimilated by Brainiac, I thought Superman 3, where a woman becomes a cyborg and tendrils start coming out and choking Superman, just like they choke Seg-El. So this is how you do references, people. All right, not the way Smallville did it 70% of the time. And I say this is my favorite show and I love it so much, but this is far superior way to reference this sort of thing. So
yeah, and also to your point, I agree. Yes, we know there's the ticking clock and we got to save Superman and the cape and all of that, but there's so much going on. And I think they do it in a really compelling way where you're really invested in the political intrigue, in the class warfare, in just the interpersonal dynamics that are going on, which is a testament to the show. And again, this whole class idea. So like we said at the beginning, right, Val-El is executed for spouting these crazy ideas about there being life out there in the universe. And right before his execution, the family is stripped of their name. They're no longer House El. They're the Rankless, and the sigil is ripped off of their clothes, and they live now down below with the commoners, as opposed to, again, the towers above Kandor City with all the various guilds and all of that. So you have that going on. There's the terrorist organization Black Zero, which is trying to liberate Krypton from the rule of theocracy and the voice of Rao. You have the Sagittari. Oh, every time they said that.
The Sagittari. Is that from the comics?
Not that I know of. Maybe, though.
It's incredible. I love that they came up with this name, and it just adds so much identity to it, right?
Yeah, the Sagittari, right? Like they're sent down to, to kind of weed out the rankless and try to find the Black Zero sympathizers among them. And one of the soldiers goes too far and kills one of the rankless. And again, this was just in terms of the period of time, I mean, really calls to mind a lot of real world issues that we're currently facing about law enforcement and all that.
Police brutality. Like I was like, there's a couple lines in here that are like straight out of like ripped from the headlines almost before it even happened. And I was like, wow. But that's the kind of stuff they don't dwell. You don't feel like we're trying to make a statement here. They're like presenting you with these sci-fi concepts and like letting you take away from what you will. And that, again, allegory, right? That's a fantastic way to present these things. And there's just so much going on that I had totally forgotten that was even like a component to this, like the downtrodden citizens feeling like the police are being unfair to them. And that whole dynamic plays throughout the whole season. Really.
It does. No, that's the thing. I think they made their points without beating you over the head with it. I think they really struck a very nice balance in all of this. And again, there's so much going on. There's, again, we mentioned Lyta Zod, who's one of the Sagittari, and her mother, Jaina Zod, is the Primus, right?
Primus.
Yeah. And very, tense relationship between the two of them. Mother's, very, very hard on the daughter. Kryptonians never ask for mercy, and they don't give it.
That was the most like badass scene of the whole thing. It really establishes it when because Jaina Zod, the daughter, is an officer in the Sagittari. That way, and she challenges her commander to this duel to the death because they're going to go something called the Rankless Initiative. They're going to go down there, they're going to bust heads and clean shop down there, and they're one of these like macho guys that like wants to just kind of enforce will on these people. And she, we haven't mentioned yet, there's like a star-crossed love of Romeo and Juliet love triangle going on with Seg-El and Jaina Zod. They're like secret lovers, even though they're she's Lyta, excuse me.
That'd be a very different story.
Yeah, very different story. But I'm sorry, yeah, Lyta Zod is the daughter. Excuse me, and she's been promised to Dev M, who is another officer in the Sagittari, and you're like, oh, I guess that's going to be Zod's dad. No, we were wrong. And so in order to kind of, she sees the injustice of what they're going to do, but she also, has a relationship with Seg-El and knows that he lives down there and she cares about those people because she cares about him. She challenges this guy to death. And this whole thing about like, Sagittari no mercy is asked for, no mercy is given, right? And it's a brutal fight. All the fights in here are so fantastic. And it's a brutal fight. And she gets this guy in a headlock and he's like, mercy. She's like, no mercy. And she snaps his neck. I was like, whoa. Like, that's badass. And, Zod's neck snapping. That's what it's all about, Anthony. So,
yeah, it all comes back around. But no, I know, like that. I mean, that fight, it was intense. And when she takes that step, to the show's credit, it felt both surprising and inevitable when she makes that decision. It was, and again, the fact that, like you said, you have this star-crossed romance between Seg and Lyta. I mean, a romance between an El and a Zod. And as we find out later in the season, Seg apparently is Drew Zod's father.
Yeah. Well, how did that strike you?
Surprising yet inevitable. I mean, it's one of those things where when Drew Zod shows up, right, and reveals, that too. I'm trying to remember because we were messaging and you were talking about your tweet, right, to the actor, and you're like, oh, I hope I didn't spoil that he was Zod. And I was like, no, but because I think I had just gotten past that point, but like I knew he was a Zod, but I don't think I knew he was the Zod. Like I thought he was going to be her father. Initially. So at the end of that episode where he's like, you're my mother, I was like, oh, like again, there were a lot of things. Look, the first time Lyta kisses Seg. I was like, whoa, okay. Like when
because it's like a fake arrest. You're like, oh, he's in trouble. You don't know that they're lovers, right?
Yeah, and even before that, when Lyta, is training with Jaina, and then at the end of it, she addresses her as mother. It's like there were a lot of cool little bits here where, I mean, maybe in retrospect, it's like, oh, that was obvious. But as I'm watching it and I was invested, I was like, man, like these are good little bits. But
Reveals,
anyway, when Zod talks about how he never knew who his father was, just that he was some soldier, it's like, well, you figure there's going to be more there. But at the same time, just in terms of DC lore, like I didn't know if they would go that far. But I'm on board. They have
that Devin character who I think you're set up to think, oh, that's going to be Zod's father. And he's a soldier and he gets lost in the Kandor, and that's why they keep the name Zod, et cetera. Right. That's the way you play it out. In the J. Michael Straczynski books, the Superman Earth 1, I believe Zod is Jor-El's brother. Like they just straight up do that. It's been a while since I've read that. Am I correct? Do you recall?
I've read it fairly recently, but I've already kind of forgot. No, I think you're right, though. I think you're right. So I guess there is precedent for that familial connection, but no, I mean, I don't know. I'm on board with this.
But the half brothers makes it work for me, that's like, because they were their closest friends, and that was interesting to begin with. They were like brothers. I mean, that's the whole thing on Smallville, right? In season 9 with Zod and Jor-El's whole thing. That's why Clark wants to save Zod, because that was Jor-El's last request. It didn't bother me. Like I thought it was a very dynamic twist, and I had forgotten how early they introduced Zod into the story. Like you see his face as a hologram, like on the 3rd episode. I'm like, they're like, who's this guy? I'm like, yeah, he's somebody new. Don't worry about him. I was like, oh, that's him. Like and knowing, because I hadn't rewatched it since I watched it the first time. Knowing the twist, you go back and you watch the way like Zod treats Seg-El. You're like, oh, well, yeah, he probably thinks this guy might be his dad. He's like, because he's like killing people who mess with him. He's like, no one touches him except me. And I'm like, oh, because he thinks he's his dad, right? And that's just so interesting, and it adds so many dynamics to everything, and it just ranks up this whole love triangle between Lyta and then Nyssa. And I never thought I would be like invested on who Superman's grandma was going to be, but I am Team Nyssa. I'm
Team Nyssa as well. I gotta say, man. So again, when we talk about the political intrigue, one of the higher ups in Kandor City is Darren Vex. He's this political climber and schemer, and always looking out for himself. And he has this daughter Nyssa, right? And they select Seg to be her intended. And that unfolded in an interesting way too, where initially, and again, maybe I was naive, I fell for Nyssa's act, but it seemed like she was genuine and she was trying to help Seg and everything. And, she's stuck within this system as well. And then you find out she's scheming with her father, and they're ultimately planning this coup to try to overthrow the voice of Rao and take back control of Kandor City. And so you see then this manipulative side of her. But then as the season continues to progress and they all have to work together, you see, yet another side of the character. And you get to the point where, and I know I'm skipping ahead, but when they're mounting their attack on Brainiac, and he gives her the key to the fortress, and he's like, just get out of here, get in the skimmer, go to one of the other cities on Krypton. And she ends up sticking around and saving him from the voice of Rao at that particular moment, and they share a genuine kiss. And I'm Team Nyssa, man.
Maybe it's the Clark and Chloe shipper in me from back in the day. Like I'm rooting for that relationship that the show doesn't like seem to want you to want. I don't know, but I don't know, man. Like I was all on board for that. She went through quite a journey. I think Darren. Like I used to think Lionel Luthor was the worst father of all time, but Darren Vex is definitely the worst father of all time.
He killed her, or would have, if she had not been a hologram. Right. So, we get to this point where, and I know, folks, we're jumping around a little bit. For those who know the show, where we're going. And if not, hopefully we are making you more interested and excited to go.
Yeah. I'm like, can people even understand what we're talking about if they haven't seen it? It's like, it's so dense. Like there's so much going on in these 10 episodes.
It is. I know I know it really is dense. And again, imagine trying to watch like late at night, trying to stay awake. But no, it's good stuff. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. I'm a proud backer of the Paragons of Earth crowdfunder. The creative team of Percival Constantine, Thomas DJ, and Eric Johns have plucked forgotten Golden Age superheroes from the public domain, reinvented them as their own sort of Justice League, and put them up against a Lovecraftian apocalypse. Support this project by going to crowdfunder.com, that's crowdfunder without an E, /paragonscomic, and read a free sample. Also, Perry, who's been a guest on the show, hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast about superheroes in media. Be sure to listen wherever you get podcasts. So again, there's this coup attempt against the voice of Rao, but at this point, the voice has been taken over by one of Brainiac's sentries, and now Darren Vex is trying to curry favor with that entity and has to round up all of the conspirators who are involved with the coup, including his own daughter. And he goes so far as to enter her chamber and fire at her. And again, she's only saved because she was able to foresee this and had a hologram in her place. But
which they had established a hologram before.
Yes.
To be fair. Yes.
They did, trying
Very
on different clothes and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. No, that was good. No, you're right, though. I mean, it's like, look, Lionel might have made Lex think he was crazy and locked him up in the asylum and subjected him to electroshock therapy to erase his memory and sent women to pretend they were in love with him and all sorts of stuff. But he still didn't do that.
Right. He would have never killed Lex. No. So I gotta say, this Darren, right? He's such a great villain because he's a weasel. He's just a weasel, and he's like he seems so pathetic, and he is pathetic, but he's also like it's an act, and like he's so fantastic. And I got a big rewatching this time. I remember back in the day, I'm like, who's this like TV Russell Crowe they got? Because he got a Russell Crowe look and energy to him. But also like Richard Harris. I thought young Richard Harris is this guy. Like it's the vibe I got. Gladiator, I guess, was on my mind when I watched this. But he's just so good, and the way he sits down in the chair with his cape is fantastic. Like he makes it so theatrical. And I think everything to do with them is very Shakespearean, right? Like a father daughter planning coups and military. I don't know. Like I thought that was fantastic because there's just so many. Again, there's so many layers, and it's so intriguing. And it's like, wow. Like little did I know I would care so much about these characters who I didn't even know existed in the Superman universe until this show. So good on you, Krypton.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where, like, yes, he and the daughter, right there, these schemers. But we see that this is a society in need of some repair, though you don't get the sense that they're the ones who are really equipped to enact that. But, the idea of, because again, we open on this Krypton that has become this theocracy. You've got the voice of Rao with this golden helmet with the different faces of the various Kryptonian gods, and they're making Val-El walk the plank. So right from the jump, you feel like, oh, this is not a great situation here in Kandor City. So, I mean, I guess just kind of at a base level, the idea of a coup to overthrow the voice, it tracks. I mean, again, the fact that it's being led by Darren Vex is dubious, but it's like you get where he's coming from, at least to an extent.
Well, he has a whole exchange, and he gets mixed up with the Zods and Jaina Zod, the head of the Sagittari.
You have to say it as Sagittari.
Sagittari. Let Rao's grace be your shield. So the Sagittari team up in a way because Jaina Zod owes them. So it's a lot of intrigue. We're not going to get into all the ins and outs, but they have a great scene together where they're all planning this coup, and they're so different. They have such different worldviews, and of course they come into conflict about it. And then Darren tells Jaina, he's like, yeah, people do things for more than one reason. Sure, I want to be in charge, but at least I'm going to value these people higher than the voice of Rao does. Like, I'm number one, they're number two. Where do you think they are on his list? And I'm like, that's a great point. Like the guy, he's making some valid points, so it's hard to argue. And do you want to delve into the voice of Rao? What's your take on this guy? That's one thing that I thought was watching it at the time, right? The actor,
Blake Ritson.
Blake Ritson, right? So he's the voice of Rao, but then we also know he's listed as Brainiac. So going into it, right? I remember watching it at the time, and there's speculation as you watch, you're like, oh, well, he's Brainiac already, and they don't even know it, and that's why he's in the mask, right? That's what everyone, watching it at the time was thinking. And it turns out, no, he was just some political guy, and then Brainiac just happens to take him over. And I thought, okay, that's cool too. But I think that's one thing. Like, I think they could have delved more into like what that guy's deal was before he became Brainiac too, right?
Dude, same. I had the same thought. Like, that actor is great, and what a voice. I mean, I loved what he did.
It's the voice of Ra. It's literally the voice of God.
Yeah, no, it's true. But no, I had and it's the exact same thing. Like, I saw the listing, I saw Brainiac and voice of Ra, so I was going in with exactly what you just said. I was like, oh, he's Brainiac in disguise, and I was pleasantly surprised that wasn't the case. But yeah, I really did want to know, like, who is this guy? How did he come to be the voice of Ra? Like, what is his deal? And we didn't get that. But it's interesting, right? Like, they start as this theocracy, and then by the end of the season, they're this militaristic society led by Zod, and all of the rankless have been conscripted to be soldiers. So you see these Kryptonians just led in these different directions. It's just, I don't know. It's just interesting. Just as a side note, one of the criticisms that I kind of saw in some of the reviews, people were saying, oh, it's like Game of Thrones. I know I'm in the minority here. I've never really watched Game of Thrones. Like, I watched the first episode and I was like, okay. It didn't grab me. I know it's hugely popular, but maybe that helped me because I didn't have that comparison as I was watching this. It didn't feel like, oh, they're trying to be Game of Thrones. Like, I was just able to buy into what this was.
Yeah, no, I'm similar. I watched a little bit of it. A lot of people in my life have read the books and love the show and all that. And I'm more of a sci-fi than fantasy guy. And so I've never really got into Game of Thrones, but I know, like, obviously that's the vibe they were going for. And even they get some actors, like the Val-El actor and I believe the Jaxter actress. They're both on Game of Thrones. And Jaxter actress went on to great acclaim for Ted Lasso a few years later. So good for her. But yeah, I didn't. That's more of a vibe. Like, you can't like rip off a vibe, and it's a good vibe. So sure, be inspired by that, right? And that's why I go to the Andor comparison now, because there's all this political intrigue and it's paced just right, and like I think the pacing of the show is very good too. Like, because I'm in a place now where like when I was younger, I was like, man, I love this serialized storytelling. Like, episodic TV is so in the past, and now that I'm older, I'm like, man, I really miss episodic TV where I can sit and just watch one thing and it's like fulfilling. And I think this show's a good middle ground because you get episodes like, it's called The House of Zod, right? And that episode is about the Zods. Like, you get the backstory of Jaina Zod, and she had a brother, right? And then her father, and how he kind of forged them into the weapons they were. And at the end of that episode, you get the reveal that General Zod is, that is the one we know, like, who he is, and he's Lyta's son from the future. I'm like, that this episode was about the House of Zod. Like, thank you. Like, it wasn't just like chapter 7 of 8, and so a beginning, middle, and end, like all these episodes, like the stakes raised, they change, like the dynamic shift. Like, I don't know, like I feel like they found a really good balance. I know you're watching like in quick succession, like years after it came out, so I don't know if you got the same vibe as I did, but watching it back then and watching it now, I was like, this is a very well thought out and paced show.
Yeah, no, I mean, even watching it in the compressed time frame that I did, I still had a similar take on it. And speaking of Jane, I mean, like, that's the thing. All of the characters go on an interesting journey over the course of just those 10 episodes. And Jaina, right, duty bound, all about honor and what the House of Zod means. But when Lyta is blamed for the murder during the Rankless Initiative, right, they pin it all on her. Jaina compromises her values and her honor in order to free Lyta. She becomes complicit in this coup attempt against the voice of Ra, but she does it for her daughter, who she has taught never to show any mercy. Yet, she now shows mercy for her, and ultimately, again, becomes part of this ragtag bunch who are on the run, trying to bring down Brainiac, and even gets to the point when she meets her grandson, Druzad, and has that moment with Seg, where she's like, I don't think this guy came back to save Krypton. Like, he came back to rule. Like, she's the one who sees this.
Right. And again, this is what I was mentioning earlier, like things you think are plot holes become plot twists and reveals. Like, you're thinking to yourself, like, are they going to ask him why he's alive? Right. And then Jaina sees through it. She's like, so how did you escape Krypton's destruction? Like, where were you? What did they put you in jail for? And he's like, well, I did a coup. I guess it runs in the family, which is kind of funny because they did the same thing. But she's the one that sees through that because they're probably the most similar, right? Her and him. And then poor Lyta gets like caught in the middle and ends up choosing her son. Like, what an impossible situation! Like your mom is fighting your son from the future, like to the death. Like, do you intervene? Like, what do you do? Who do you side with? And I don't know. It's like he's this radicalized guy who is probably he's the right guy for the job, but but you. I don't know. Like, we don't need that kind of ruler, right? I mean, it's like if a guy got in a time machine and went back in time to like America in the 50s and changed the course of things because he didn't like how things turned out. And people respond to him because he's a charismatic guy. And not, right. I mean, that's what the fun thing about sci-fi and fantasy is, right? So yeah, he is a very capable leader. You get why people would fall in line with him, and they're clearly there's chaos and they need some order. And that's what Zod's all about. But like, and you know, you'll see where it goes in the second season, obviously. But like, to have it end on that, like, kneel before Zod, I was like, oh, he said the thing. Like, it was totally earned.
They saved it. And that's the thing. I feel like on any other show, it would have been kneel before Zod from the jump. But here, there was one moment earlier on where he has to kneel and he's like, I'm not used to being in this position. That's like perfect. Yeah. But they held like the restraint that they showed, right? And it has more impact when then you get to that final scene and he's finally
because you almost forget that it's a thing. You almost forget about it by that point. And like, oh, they brought it back because there was a lot of like lines about like, well, Zod's kneel to no one, right? Throughout the season, right? Like, oh, they're sprinkling. That's sort of a reference. That's sort of a mindset thing. But to have him say the famous line is literally the last line of the season. That was fantastic. And way to go. Smallville, Callum Blue said it like in his first episode. I think he might have said it to somebody else in the first 2 or 3 episodes. Then I think they save it until the season finale. It's the last thing he says, right? It's the last thing he says to Clark before Clark stabs himself with the kryptonite and jumps off the building and like gives him the like, haha, you lost kind of smile. And that's the same kind of. I got to give Smallville some credit too. I know I was talking, I was dunking on our favorite show there earlier, but that's great. And I don't know, man. Like he has such a Colin Sem's a big guy, he's intimidating presence. Because you've seen how formidable the Sagittarii are, Lyta and Jaina both, and to see him fight both of them, that it just gives you context of how like formidable this guy is, and that's what I'm saying, man. I wish I could see him fight Superman one day, but I guess we never will.
I know, but no, that's the thing. You're right. No, that's actually a really good point. The physicality that he has, that's something that we have not seen in other Zods. I mean, just the stature that he has on this show. And it works here too, right? Because there's no powers, right? So you don't have that aspect to play with. So really to just kind of have that the voice. I mean, he's got a great presence. I mean, really, just really a fantastic side. I feel like we haven't talked a ton about Seg. Like he's there.
No, the main character.
The main character. But first of all, I got to say, so Cameron Cuff, the actor who plays Seg, a legit comic book fan.
Big fan. Yeah.
Yeah. Which was very cool. And on the Blu-ray, there's one of the special features is the Comic-Con panel that Jeff Johns moderated with Cameron Cuff and a couple of the producers when they were first announcing the show. Side note, at that panel, Johns was talking about how we're going to have these time travelers. You're going to see Adam Strange, Hawkwoman.
Oh.
So I think that was another change there.
Another change.
Yeah. Interesting. But yeah, like a true comic book fan, even on that panel, Cameron Cuff was talking about Batman comics that he had been reading, and he mentioned 3 Robins, and Jeff Johns was like, oh, there's 4 Robins. And he was like, well, not at this time. And it's like, good for you. It's like, good for you, Jeff Johns. Yeah, relax. You know what? It's like for once you actually have someone on one of these shows who reads the comics, who like actually seems like a genuine fan. It's like, you don't have to try to make him look stupid. Come on.
No, absolutely. And he has that Superman energy to him, right? He's got the look, right? He's got the dark hair, and I think I don't know if it's just because Colin Salmon is so tall. I don't know how Cameron I don't know how tall he is. But like I don't know if he could have played Superman in anything, but he's great as like a family member of Superman in this. I totally buy him as part of that lineage.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's like in all honesty, if he had been cast or ends up getting cast as Superman, I could see it. But yeah, I agree. I feel like again, another instance of a great balance where he's not a Kal-El clone, but he still feels, again, part of that family. And I like, there's, especially at the beginning, there's a bit of a roguish kind of scoundrel aspect to him. He's hustling the Sagittari for money at the bar. You lose a good bit of that, I think, for a big part of the season, because in that first episode, his parents are gunned down by Jaina in the council chamber, because they've taken, the mother has taken Seg to the fortress and that whole business. But so that kind of sort of dampens that energy of his. But it comes out at various points, especially in the finale when he tricks Brainiac into getting in front of the Phantom Zone projector. You get a little bit of that again. So I like that. I enjoyed I enjoyed the performance. I really dug him as Seg. Yeah,
and well, the show gets canceled, so a lot of things are unresolved. So I'll just say this: like, I know they tried to get him for Crisis on Infinite Earths, it just didn't work out. And I would have loved to have some sort of follow up or bringing this show into the fold there, because I think that really deserves it. It's rewarding to see, not that it's a prerequisite to be a fan, but it's great that somebody's like so excited about the source material and the mythology and the universe, who's like the lead of the show. And yeah, like you said, we haven't been talking about it much because there's so much going on, but he has a journey, right? I mean, he like you said, he's this like kind of devil may care kind of guy, and then he gets given this impossible legacy, and he has to make all these choices that are like really like, what would you do in that situation? like these are impossible choices he has to make, and you really feel the weight of his, like, Adam Strange and him, like they have a friction, like kind of go back and forth, and he thinks that Adam Strange gave his life to save him, and so he feels guilty about that because they were on the rocks there, and I don't like, it's all just very well done, and he is, I mean, if there's a point of view character, it is him, and he gets around too. He's a charming guy. Like, he's not only does he conceive Zod, presumably in the season finale, then he makes out with Nyssa when she saves him a Brainiac. I'm like, this guy, man, I know. What a player.
I know. And they have their fetus growing in the Genesis chamber, Seg and Nyssa. And like you said, I mean, that's like straight out of, I mean, the comics generally, that whole idea, but specifically, and a lot of the language even that we get comes from Man of Steel, right? This idea that this is the only way children are conceived, and that they have a predetermined role in society. And of course, that calls to mind Russell Crowe's speech in Man of Steel about, what if a child dared to be something different or aspired to be something greater than what society had intended. So, you have all of that.
But presumably Zod was conceived biologically.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, that's so that's the one thing, because they talk about how that's their only means of reproduction. But so is it that all of the people or most of the people can't go through this process naturally? But also, what about the rankless?
Yeah, because they don't have Genesis Chamber IDs. I would assume.
Right.
That's, they don't have time to go into all that. I'm sure it could all be explained. That's the thing. You're so caught up in all this other stuff. You're not sitting there thinking about, whoa, wait a minute. Right. So I'm sure I have faith that they had thought that out on some level on the show, because everything else is so well thought out as it is. They don't have the time to go into it, but I'm sure if there was ever a moment where there was time, they would have explained it.
But going back to what you were saying about Crisis. So again, while I haven't watched season 2 yet, I do know that it is not resolved. And I'm gonna pose a dilemma for you, not unlike the one that Seg faces in the show. Would you sacrifice the Tom Welling, Erica Durance scene in Crisis for closure for Krypton? If it had been, I know it was scheduling, but like, let's say it was really a matter of like, listen, we can only have one of these scenes.
Oh, this is really impossible. Save your grandson or save your planet choice here, man.
Can I throw a third option in that make it even harder?
Yes, please. Yeah.
What if they're like, listen, we have 3 choices, but only room for one scene. It's Welling and Durance, it's Cameron Cuff, or it's Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher finally putting a little button on the Lois and Clark cliffhanger.
Man. Okay, of the 3, I'd say Krypton first, Lois and Clark second, and then Smallville third, because as frustrating as the series finale of Smallville might have been, there was closure. That was done. Like I love the Crisis scene, right? I know you've come around to it yourself. And it was what a fantastic, exciting time to be a Smallville fan and have those scenes with him and John Cryer. If they had used Lois better, I might have been more excited about the Smallville scene, but she's like a blanket, like there's nothing. She comes, hey, you made it funny. I'm like, what? And I'm glad they're together. The last image we have of them is holding hands, walking back to the Kent farm. It's fantastic. I love it. I love that that's the last image of those characters. But we didn't need it. It would have been great to get some closure for Lois and Clark, and it certainly would have been great to get some sort of closure for this, as you will see when you finish season 2. So that's where I am on it.
That's how I feel.
Maybe a hot take. I don't know if you expected that answer from me, but
no, I did. I think for that reason, like you said, yeah, I've really made more than made my peace with the Smallville piece in Crisis, but yeah, it's like, again, that wasn't unfinished business, whereas those other 2 shows were. And so if there had been an opportunity, the other thing, and I know this is going to come up next week with Tyler, because I know he has thoughts on this, but I'll pose it to you too. With Krypton, and look, we started in our little cold open talking about Superman and Lois. I could see I don't think this will actually happen, but you could see a scenario where they connected those 2 shows in some way. They could exist in the same.
Yeah, we don't know what Zod looks like, so nothing. We don't know what Jor-El looks like on Krypton,
right?
We don't know what Zod looks like on Superman and Lois. I'm just trying to think of is there any overlap? No. So the message at the very beginning that Seg-El is leaving, that is Tyler Hoechlin's Superman. That's my headcanon now. I like that too. In my headcanon, I don't know. I don't even remember if they follow up on that anymore in season 2. But I liked how I can just imagine this is part of the archives that Jor-El gives Kal-El, like, oh, this is my father, and he left you a message, right? I also like how, like, the show right off the top, they address its own existence. It addresses its own existence. It's like the story of our family is not how we died, it's how we lived. And I think that head on just confronts, like, why are you even talking about this? They're gonna blow. We all know it blows up, and that the show answers that right off the top.
I love that. I mean, that's the thing. Even in just those opening seconds, when I heard that, I said, okay, I'm on board with this idea. And it's the other thing too, where whenever we see Krypton, it is usually just in those final moments, right? So to actually now explain more of how it all came to be, I think it is a valid story to tell. But yeah, I think, and again, I really don't think we would see this actually happen on the final season of Superman and Lois, but I'll just put it out there in case someone's listening. It's like, even if it's, it's the sort of thing in an ideal world, it'd be great if you have Cameron Cuff as a hologram for one scene, just to be like, hey, by the way,
kind of canonize it.
Yeah, and I had this crazy adventure and this is how it all turned out. And I just wanted to let you know. But, or even if there's just like a mention of him in something that Lara is telling, like anything, if there's some way to, again, I don't see that happening, but like we're saying, it could, like those 2 could fit together. I would like that.
Yeah. It's the thing where Smallville won't fit with anything because they went on so long, they established too many things. If Smallville ended in like season 4, you'd be like, oh, well then, yeah. Then, the Aquaman show, right? You can connect certain things, but nothing will connect to Smallville. Like that was the thing about the Supergirl show existing. Like, oh, maybe Tom Welling can come be Superman. I'm like, well, he could be a Superman, but we know that he's not that Laura Vandervoort is not Melissa Benoist. Like, that's not that universe. So you run in those things, but in these smaller, shorter shows, you could find a way to connect them. And I support that 100%. And just to see Colin Salmon, I mean, I know the CW has his number. Can we see a hologram of General Zod?
I know. Oh, man. That would be, 2 short-lived shows. One canceled on a cliffhanger. To be able to marry the 2 of them together and create. And then it's like, you could put them in a box set together. It'd be beautiful.
Yeah. We're setting ourselves up for massive disappointment.
No, I know. But look, headcanon is a good watch. We're like, all right, look, at least they're not going to do it, but look, at least we have our headcanon. And they'll probably like throw one scene of Zod where it's like, God damn it.
Flashback. Yeah.
Thanks.
We didn't need that.
You know what we haven't mentioned yet? Doomsday. This show gives us Doomsday. And I know we see him in full force in season 2. I've seen the clip online, but yeah, they establish him as this ancient weapon buried in this stasis chamber.
And that's how we were confirmed that Zod is the son of Seg-El.
Right.
Because the L's and the Zods, thousands of years ago, like did this science experiment to create this ultimate weapon. And there's this giant door and there's a big seal on it. And it has like the House of El and the House of Zod symbols as one, like kind of combined, right? and they try to blow it up and it doesn't open, but it's established like lots of people cutting their hands and bleeding on things. Like, damn, like Kryptonians really don't care about that, huh?
I was going to ask you, if you had to open some sort of blood activated passageway, especially before you knew how much blood was needed, would just a little prick on your finger, or would you like slice your hand open? Because he just goes for it.
I guess like it's your exposed flesh, but I like pull up my arm, maybe cut my, my tricep area. I don't know, like somewhere that don't need all the time. Like my thigh, perhaps. Like there's better areas to bleed from than your palm of your hand. And Seg does that at least twice, maybe 3 times in this show. Cuts his hand open like that, and but they figure out like, oh, the blood, because that's how he activates the fortress. He bleeds on it. So they see the symbol and Seg's like, oh, we gotta bleed on it. And it'll take both of us because we're House Zod and House El. And they both bleed on it and they open up. And then the one of the weaker parts of the season was like all those people living down there, like the ice prince or whatever that was. Like I was like, what is this? It's kind of half baked, but whatever, it's fine. But the people guarding Doomsday, they come and they stop him. But then Zod goes, Zod and Lyta, he kind of wins Lyta over to his side, and they're gonna like, well, Seg's not gonna agree to this. We got to do what we got to do. Zod's understand to protect Krypton. Like they go on their own to go release Doomsday, and Zod tells Seg-El like, well, I don't need you because I just figured out you're my dad, and I'm both. And he bleeds on it by himself and opens the door, and that's kind of where the big reveal is there. But then Doomsday's gone because Seg beat him to it and moved him to under Kandor, because their thinking is, oh, Brainiac's gonna take Kandor, he'll take Doomsday, problem solved. And I gotta say, like, if you told me there's a Superman prequel show, it was gonna have Zod, Brainiac, and Doomsday in it, I would have been like, I don't know, y'all. Like, it's a little stuffed. But the reason it works is just because, one, of course, Zod is there. It's Krypton, right? Him or his family, right? Check. Brainiac taking Kandor, the Bottle Sea Kandor, established continuity. Check. And we know Doomsday was a Kryptonian scientist experiment. So none of these characters are out of place, right? I mean, it's the joke about Smallville where he meets all the people before he becomes Superman. Like that does not apply because all these things are canonically supposed to be on Krypton around this time. And I think that's why it works.
Absolutely. And even with Doomsday, the fact that he was this ancient experiment born on Krypton right out of the comics, the layer that's put on it here is that it was the Els and the Zods who were the ones who made this. But it's like, that's a great addition. That's the fact that they were the ones, who were doing that. So no, I mean, like, it totally works. I know it's funny when we talk about prequels, I watched all 5 seasons of Gotham. Similar thing there. It's like I have all these villains running around before Bruce becomes Batman. And it just kind of flips it, right? Because normally you have this question is, does Batman's presence inspire these others? But here it's like, these villains, their presence necessitated the need for Batman, right? Like we had to have a Batman because all these people were running around. So it's like, but here, totally organic. Like you're right. Everyone who's there should be there. Hop in the Supermobile and join us for the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, available exclusively for members of my Patreon community. It's a monthly tour across the DC universe with the signature Digging for Kryptonite style applied to your other DC favorites. Additional Patreon rewards include advanced listens, sponsorships, and more. We offer regular monthly memberships, discounted annual plans, free trials, and a la carte purchases. Visit patreon.com/Anthony Desiato or click the link in the show notes for more. Thank you all. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Do you know who else shows up in season 2?
I know Lobo.
Yeah, that's the one. I'm like, yeah, I don't really care about. He's 290s for me, so he's 290s for me. So, that's when I could have done without but whatever, right? You'll see season 2 when you get there. But I know the posters for season 2. It's like a bad day to be a hero, and it's got like Zod, Brainiac, Lobo, and Doomsday. I'm like, wow, what a time to be alive. This Syfy Channel show has it, and the way they defeated Brainiac, was that satisfying to you?
Yeah, I like. So the lead up to that is one of my favorite moments where Zod. So there's in that finale, there's a lot of back and forth and posturing about what's the best way to try to stop Brainiac. There's a lot of back and forth and all that. But Zod at one point has the idea to try to trade Val-El, the in the flesh Val-El, to to Brainiac, because in the Phantom Zone, Val-El has seen all of these possible futures. So that's new information, new knowledge that he could maybe barter with Brainiac for. And when he proposes this to Seg refuses, and he's like, I'm not, we can't do that. And it's just like the exchange between them got at that fundamental divide between the two of them, but also you could totally envision the exact same exchange between Zod and Clark, right? Where Zod is like, you wouldn't sacrifice one person to save millions? And it's like, no, you will. Like, I always think back, did that track for you, I guess, first of all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I always think back to the end of season 2 of Supergirl, where they're fighting the Daxamites, right? And they have to seed the atmosphere with lead, but that means that Mon-El, who's one of them, has to be banished.
Right.
And Clark says to Kara, like, I wouldn't have been strong enough to do that. Like, if I had to send Lois away, like, I wouldn't have been able to. And it was an interesting scene because I think it highlights a distinction between the two of them. And I guess a reason why, like, I always gravitate more towards Clark is it's, more the human side. It's like I admire the sacrifice that Kara is willing to make, but
right.
I don't know. But just that exchange between the two of them and Zod's disbelief. And you get where both of them are coming from. And like from Zod's perspective, in terms of tactics, strategy, weighing, right? It's like, of course, like, yeah, it makes sense. It's like you should trade this elderly guy for everybody. But I just love that between them.
Well, that's what's so interesting about his intentions. Like, it totally tracks, right? Like, he was a hero of the people in Krypton, but it's like, that's why I go back to, like, it's like the wrong guy got a time machine, right? I'm saying, like, that's this guy, right? Because, like, it's like, again, like if somebody went back to the 50s or 60s in America or wherever in the world and decided, like, I don't like the way a course of events went, I'm going to, like, reshape the future in my image, literally in my image. We see statues of him, Zod, across the universe later on and at the end of the show. And, which is Adam on Earth?
I was going to ask you. I haven't seen season 2. I don't know.
I don't remember, but anyway, that's where you see the statue of Zod.
So Adam Strange ends up in one of the bottled cities, and it very much looks like Earth.
Because I'm like, did you go back to Detroit? I was waiting for like a "Welcome to Detroit" sign or something, but we don't see it. It's where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so Zod, right? He's a criminal, right? But now he has the knowledge of the future and all these things to working to his advantage. So he knows history and he knows all these things. So he goes back in time and yes, his greater purpose is to save Krypton, but also he just wants to rule. Like, Jaina called it right. And because even with Brainiac, when he's like, look, I'll give him the universe, but as long as he gives Krypton to me, like that's what he tells Brainiac, leave Krypton to me and you can have everything else. And so like that's his ultimate goal. Like he is ultimately a villain. Like I see his point of view, but like he's like I keep going back to, he's the wrong guy to get a time machine, and that's what he has here. And it takes all these other characters to at least reel him in, and then ultimately he wins at the end.
I know.
Even though they defeat Brainiac, Zod is triumphant.
I know. But I love when Brainiac says like you would sacrifice the rest of the universe for this planet to rule, and Brainiac says like how selfish you people are.
Brainiac, let's talk a little bit more about Brainiac though before we kind of wrap it over, because the voice around Brainiac and this whole evolution, the episode where there's a couple of where he's taken over the voice around, but he's hiding it, and he's talking to like Una, the little girl, and he's talking about like faith and like all these interesting things, and it's him as an AI trying to understand this planet and these people. And he's like, "Oh, you surprised me. So I'm so rarely surprised." And he says that a couple of times throughout the show. And he has a very different presence about him. Like, I believe this isn't just some bad guy who happens to be a computer. This is a different way of thinking, this guy. And I think that's translated so well through all his conversations, through all these characters, even Zod at the end. Like, you're such a selfish people. He tells him, like you said.
Yeah. And, when we go, so again, there's this stretch where he's possessing the voice of Rao, and then Nyssa stabs him in the head with the crystal, and he disintegrates, or explodes, and then reforms as the full-fledged Brainiac. I mean, just in the classic, the full green, I mean, looks like he stepped right off the comic book page. I know I keep using the word balance, but again, here, I feel like their take on Brainiac, he had personality, yet still the cold, calculating essence, right? I just feel like they nailed it, because I guess it could have been, you could foresee a scenario where they go too far in one direction or the other, right? Like, you don't want to make him too over the top. You don't want to make him boring.
Yeah, no, he was entertaining to watch, regardless of whatever form he was in.
Yeah.
And thinking about that too, like, because you're waiting for this like reveal of everybody to figure out that he's Brainiac. And I loved how they subverted this, because like Seg and all them, like, here's what we're gonna do. If we expose him as like an alien in front of everybody, they're gonna be like, oh no, he's evil. Let's throw over the government. So they have this whole thing where they try to assassinate him in front of everybody, but instead Brainiac reveals himself as like, I have transcended, and they're like, oh, you're a god, and they worship him, and that makes it even worse. And like they just cut to all the characters, and they're so defeated, like, well, that was our plan, and it just didn't go 180. And that's, again, so interesting, like, because it's just like you thought it was going to go a different way, but you totally buy that it went the way that it did, right?
Absolutely.
Because if, I don't know, if you saw somebody floating in fire and like was like, I'm your god, you'd be like, well, I don't know, it seems that way. Does seem like a god right now.
I mean, look, we didn't see how the voice of Rao came to power in the first place, but whatever he did, it wasn't nearly the display of power that he shows here. So whatever he did that got people on board in the first place, right, was less than this. So the fact that they would be taken with that display that totally makes sense.
Well, and he tells them what they want to hear. He's like, the rank list will be ranked, and you tell the people what you want to hear. You win the crowd, and you win the planet or the city, as we find out. You know, speaking of the other, these are just stray thoughts I'm having now. Earlier on, I don't know if you remember, but like he's like walking the streets, and there's like some like old person in his way, and he starts doing these weird like hand gestures. I was, what?
I don't
you
know.
Recall this?
I don't know what the hand things were. I don't know. It's like,
does he have power? Was he gonna heal him? Like, he's just a guy, I thought. So.
I think that maybe because he was helmeted and you couldn't see his face, like they needed to have him do something more visual, I guess. And they were like, do stuff with your hands. I mean, I don't know. Or what sort of ritual he might have been performing. I mean, that's the benefit of ancient alien world. You know, we could just chalk it up to that.
And because I know of like Rao as their sun god and stuff, but I thought it was interesting. They delved into this like politics, religion. Like, I don't know, they don't go too deep into it all, but like they engage with it in interesting ways in a universe where they hadn't really gone in such a way in a Superman property in multimedia anyway that I've seen. I found that fascinating because you really felt like this was an alien world, right? You felt like it was an alien culture, and that makes it more intriguing. It's not just like, you know, people wearing different costumes. This is a different, well thought out culture, which makes it a lot more intriguing to kind of, because you become fascinated. You want to know more, right?
Absolutely. And I feel like it was interesting because the way the characters spoke, it like they didn't veer too much into kind of colloquialisms that would make you feel like, oh, they're just talking like they're on Earth. But it wasn't just stilted, overly formal language. I felt like, I don't mean to keep using this word balance, but I feel like they were able to kind of walk that line where it felt conversational, felt natural, but it still didn't feel like you were listening to Earthlings per se, for the most part.
It is. I don't. How do you feel about the profanity? Because I do find it amusing, like on Battlestar Galactica, where like they frack and all that stuff. Like that's become its own. That's funny. But to hear people on Krypton say like shit and ass, I was like, it's a little odd.
It's I mean, it's weird because like it's odd on two levels, right? It's odd that they're Kryptonians saying this, but it's also odd because like it's a DC project, it's a Superman project. I mean, I don't know. Although maybe after watching 4 years of Harley Quinn, maybe I shouldn't be so surprised anymore.
Just watch some Peacemaker. Okay.
Well, that's true too. No, I know. I guess I know these recent projects maybe have kind of upended that a bit, but. And then the fist bump thing, even early on, like that was a cool bit when Adam Strange.
Come on, man.
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, you guys not do this here?" And then after he leaves, Seg and Kem fist bump each other. I thought that was
good.
Cool.
The fun, I was like, whatever on the cursor words or whatever, but like the funniest one to me, my reaction was very similar to Jack Sir, because Jack Sir, the terrorist leader, is sitting down across from Jaina Zod, the Primus of the Sagittarii, and the head of the police. And she's like, so how does it feel that your government has completely betrayed you and thrown you to the wolves? And Jaina's like, pretty shit, actually. And then Jack Sir laughs. And I was like, that's a fantastic response.
Yeah, I know.
Because like, after all that, you're right where I am. And you were trying to get me this whole time. Like, it's just, they're in the same boat. And it was a very amusing situation. And throwing in Jack Sir like that at the end, gender swap for Jack Sir. And we saw Jack Sir. This is not the Jack Sir from Man of Steel.
No,
this is not season 10 Clone Lex Luthor or the creator of Cyborg. And interesting to throw a protege of Val-El, so kind of like bringing all these characters together. And you know Jack Serve best, everybody, from destroying Krypton's moon. So stay tuned for that. Watching Krypton. So
okay, all right. And you had asked about how they ultimately dispatch Brainiac. No, I thought that was cool. The idea, and I love this scene of Val and Seg in the fortress, and Brainiac and Zod show up, and the four of them sharing the scene together. And Brainiac approaches Val, and it turns out that's a hologram, right? And that allows Seg to activate the Phantom Zone projector. And again, that's where I feel like you see a little bit more of that roguishness come back for a minute there.
Speaking of the hologram, do you think it was weird when the real Val showed up? He just kind of looked at the hologram and kind of nodded and went away. I'm like, oh, okay. Like that was like, I'm no longer needed here. Thank you. Just an interesting moment.
It was funny. It's like, again, it makes sense. I mean, how crowded is this Fortress of Solitude going to be, right? But I know it's like, hey, two heads are better than one. I mean, maybe this program could still help.
To yourself, you're both geniuses, right? Anyway, but hey, it's the classic Superman outwitting his enemy, right? I mean, that's what Seg-El does, what Kal-El does best, right?
I know, that's true. I know. It's funny. You saw a lot more of those connection points, those nods to to the other projects that I guess I don't know, man. I think I was just especially watching this for the first time. Like I was just I was so pulled into it. But no, it's one of these things. It's like, was I expecting a fist fight between fisticuffs, as I like to say.
There it is. Yeah, no George Reeves here, so no fisticuffs.
No fisticuffs. But no, and especially earlier in the episode, you have Lyta sends all of the Sagittari pilots to attack, and Brainiac just the wave of his hand, or not even, just looks at them, and they all and they're destroyed. So it's like,
I like that too, because it's like, like in another property, like, we're gonna get him, like we're gonna band together, and then through the power of friendship, we're gonna, like, no, you're nothing to him. He's gonna just destroy all of you. And that was very realistic. And I was like, damn, he didn't come into play.
Yeah. So with power on that level, again, I wouldn't really expect a fight. So I think this outwitting him and banishing him to the Phantom Zone, but of course he grabs Seg and pulls Seg in as well at the very end. But you get a nice moment with between Seg and Val as Val is trying to pull him back, and and a call back to earlier conversations about hoping for a better tomorrow or believing in a better tomorrow. Seg kind of tries to impart that to his grandfather, who had lost a little bit of that faith. So, I mean, it ends
it's
on
like poetry rhymes, man, because it's what he told him at the beginning, because he's like, keep believing in a better tomorrow, when he was banished as a kid, and now Seg is being banished to the Phantom Zone, talking to his grandfather, re-inspiring him. I got emotional about that. I'm like, this is some powerful stuff, man. Like I thought that was such a fantastic emotional through line. And again, I'll say it here, and no other Superman property have I like bought the whole like hope and better tomorrow thing than this.
I teared up during that speech that Val gave to Seg about hope and the action that's required in order to bring that about. So no, man, it worked a lot. I mean, I know we've jumped around a ton in the conversation, but we've hit a lot. And I think we've hit a lot of the characters and the themes, and again, like you said, it's plot wise, it's dense. There's a lot going on. If we were to sit here and kind of like go beat by beat, we'd be here for a long time. I was going to ask you, you got to always hold on to Smallville, Arrow, Legends of Tomorrow, Superman. No, always hold on to Krypton.
I know. I did actually cover, I didn't re-listen to them before I did this, because I kind of wanted to come in here fresh. After I've rewatched them now and done this conversation with you, I'll go back and re-listen. But I covered the pilot, and then the first season as a whole, and the second season as a whole back in the day when I did it, because I wanted to cover it. I was so excited and interested in it, but I guess I missed the boat there. I should have done week to week back in the day. We could be listening back to those thoughts, but no, I mean, I think talking to you here about it now, and there will be no always on to Krypton. I think we're going to cover it all, but I could, though, because I love it so much. You could really sit down here and examine this show. Like it's worth. I mean, we talk an hour and a half or more about an episode of Smallville. I could probably talk 3 hours about these shows, because there's so much going on and so much intrigue. Like we didn't even mention like his bartender friend, really. Cam. Yeah. Like that's another character. I was like, is this going to be like an annoying comic relief guy? But no, he was kind of an uncle figure to the little girl, and he was a valued friend and had his own thing going on here. Him and Adam Strange had a good kind of dynamic there for a while. So like, there's not a weak character or weak actor in this ensemble, and it's fantastic.
Oh, that's the thing. And look, it's not necessarily comparison, and we don't want to put, and we love Small. I don't mean to always like, because I'm thinking of Smallville, but it's like, or even the Arrowverse shows or anything. With this, and maybe because it was 10 episodes, right? And it's, it's 10 episodes and it's sci-fi. It's not the CW. So it's like we didn't have to kind of sit through some of those BS subplots that we're well used to in those other shows.
All right. I mean, there was a love triangle, but I really enjoyed that love triangle. Like, I totally understand. Like, it's funny as the season shifts, like, if it goes further, like, even though, like, Seg and Wyatt are still, hooking up, right? As time goes on, like, he's getting closer to Nyssa, like, to the point where, like, near the end, like, him and Nyssa are on the street, and Zod and Lyta find them, and he's like, it's just, there's a lot of cutaways of Lyta looking at them, like, the jealousy. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, you kind of betrayed him a couple times. So you get it. Like, it's like, I'm Team Nyssa, right? But I understand, like, I totally see both sides of, like, that whole love. Like, I'm not actively like, like, I hate Lyta or whatever, right? Not like that kind of stuff. It's just like, I just happen to gravitate toward that relationship more. So I'm really hoping that Nyssa turns out to be Superman's grandma. So
I think we did it, man.
I think we covered a lot of stuff there. Like, and again, like, there's so much more there to unpack, and I cannot recommend this show enough to people. Like, it's this great, just, I don't know, is it a hidden gem in the Superman multimedia, or?
I would say, although it's always hard to gauge. I mean, I tweeted about this, like, if people watch this, and I got a lot, for me, like, I got a lot of people responding. So it definitely has its fans, but I don't know, just at least from people I've spoken to in my circles and whatnot. I mean, I think it is one of those more under the radar ones. And it's better than it has any right to be, really. Again, on paper, yes. It's this, again, sci-fi, 200 years ago, Superman's grandpa, we're going to have Brainiac and Zod and Doomsday. Again, like, on paper, like, man, this is not going to work. And it does. And it's better. And it has more integrity than you might expect it to, right? Because it would be easy to just kind of pepper this with those cutesy nods to the future, but it really tells its own story. I was so impressed with it.
That's a great word for it. Integrity. It has a lot of its self-respect and integrity, and because it's telling its own story. It's not concerned going out of its way to be like, hey, you remember from Superman? Like, this is, all this, and you get caught up in this character, like you get invested in how these people live. Now you are now invested in the people of Krypton. So now, like, when it blows up, you're going to feel a big loss, as opposed to, as much as we love, Marlon Brando and all them. Like, it was a very sterile, like, oh, no big loss with these guys. They're jerks anyway. Like, I don't really care. They're all dead. But spending time on this planet, you're really gonna see the difference. And when I think about Krypton now, like, I'm gonna think about Smallville and all that, But I'm definitely, this is taking up a big part of my headspace when I think back on what Krypton was like before it blew up. And that's the purpose of this show. And they just knocked it out of the park, man. Like, I talk about the concept. It's kind of, when you have the right people behind the scenes, they can make, anything work. Like Batman Beyond, right? Batman Beyond, the team behind Batman the Animated Series was tasked with, we want like a teenage Batman. And, like, studio notes, they're always the worst. And then they're like, well, what if we make Bruce Wayne an old guy and we have a guy and he trains him? And, like, that could have gone so wrong. But Batman Beyond went, in my opinion, went so right. So it's the same kind of energy where you're presented with this concept, which could really take a left turn at some point and go off the rails. But when you treat it with care and respect of the overall mythology of the source material, you can come out with something great. And that's what I feel like Krypton is.
That's a great comparison. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that I appreciate that we got to know the people on Krypton. We got to meet a number of individuals, but again, we also got this larger sense of the social hierarchy and everything. But I think it's important to because I feel like the show made it feel like more of a real lived-in place, whereas in other stories, especially when you are just kind of looking at their last moments, or Superman in the present day, learns more backstory or revelations about Krypton. And a lot of times, like, it can't, either they're just this overly cold, sterile race, or, maybe they were nefarious space conqueror. Like, I feel like sometimes,
oversimplified,
right? It can be oversimplified, painting with the broad brush of, like, what Krypton was. So I feel like this shows you more of the nuance of it. And like any world, like our world, they're good and bad, and people trying, and it's messy, and it's a mix.
Man, I'm just gonna be thinking about like if only this was like concurrent with the Superman show and they could do some crossover thing now. Like that's what we need. We need a time travel episode of Superman Lois season 4 where he gets the chance to go back to Krypton, and it's this Krypton, right? How amazing would that be?
They have no budget. They don't even have budget for their cast. Like, I mean, yeah, that would be amazing. But
oh man,
I don't know. But a little hologram.
Oh, you know what? I just remember though that I did want to share in case you didn't know. Jaina Zod. Paradise Island, Themyscira in Wonder Woman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Oh, nice.
She's one of the main lieutenants of Hippolyta. So,
okay.
Hashtag it's all connected, man. This is a nexus of, that's what I'm trying to say, of all DC media. It's right here. It's Krypton.
I know.
But
it's a gem.
You know what, Anthony? You know what else I say? Krypton had its chance. That's what I say. So, it had its 2 seasons. Well, the Syfy network, they went full Henry Cavill Superman on Krypton.
Well, it's funny though, because again, I haven't watched season 2 yet. From what I've heard, it is a little bit of a dip from the season 1. What do you remember?
I'm very eager to rewatch it because I remember I enjoyed it, but I remember at the time, and it might have been just because I had no expectation for season 1 and it blew me away. And then of course, much like us hyping this up nonstop, all the listeners who haven't seen it are like going to expect the greatest thing ever made. And they're going to be like, what are these guys talking about? But no, it is. I still recommend it. But I think that might have been the case of like my expectations are very high. And as always, you kind of, where are they going to go? Right. You spend the time speculating and you're like, they did that. Okay. I would have done something different, but that's cool, I guess. And it's like a lot of the status quo changes, as it should, because it's a little bit of it's not picks up right after this. So, I recall enjoying it, but do remember like thinking when it was over, I think I like season 1 more, but I'm going to rewatch season 2 and look forward to listening to you and Tyler talk about it and see what I think. But if there is a dip, it's not like it's not some like nosedive of quality. It's like, okay. And there's some very interesting, they continue to go into the Superman lore and do some very interesting things with, I don't know how much you know about it, but expect more well done incorporation of things from the Superman mythos in season 2. So I'm excited for you to experience it for the first time.
All right. No, I appreciate that tease. Yeah, no, that's good to know, because I hate to be here this episode. Like, this is the best. And I come on next week, like, this thing just really fell apart. But the audience is experiencing it with me in real time. And no, I stand by everything we said. And anyone who hasn't watched at least season 1, I encourage them to. I thank you very much. Look, when we talk Smallville prequels, origin stories, pre-origin stories, of course, I think of you and your love of Smallville. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight and rewatching the season. It's no small thing. So I appreciate it. Of course, the audience hears the commercial for Always Hold On to Smallville. But is there anything else that you want to add or tell people about?
Oh yeah, I'm a proud patron now of Digging for Kryptonite. So you'll hear Anthony talking about me and my podcast every episode here on Digging for Kryptonite. So thank you. And we are in season 9 right now, which is one of my favorite seasons. Very Krypton and Zod heavy. So I'm living in that headspace a lot recently. And and just go check us out over there and talking about Smallville obviously, and then some of our other shows. Arrow, Legends of Tomorrow, Star Wars. We got. I'm not the host of those shows. I have friends and colleagues in podcasting that are doing those, but I pop in and out of everything, and we're just having a good time over there. Always holding on to all these shows. No Always Hold On to Krypton, though, but we do have some Krypton specials. So go back in our back catalog and find us talking about them. I'm eager now to go back and listen to what I thought. I do. Now that it's unlocking more memories, I do remember like we were joking about like, who are these people's names? I don't even know, because it's. They throw all these alien names at you in the first episode, and it took me so long to kind of remember them even.
And with the British accents, it's like that adds a whole other thing to it as well, where there were a few instances
calls him Darren. He's like, it's Darren. Yeah. So anyway, it's always a pleasure coming on here talking about this, and thanks for giving me a reason, because I had not rewatched it since it aired. So thanks for giving me a reason to revisit it, and I'm really glad it held up, and I'm looking forward to rewatching season 2 coming up.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Zach. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back in 1 week for our discussion of Krypton season 2. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.